Welcome back guys. In this video I'll be comparing the image quality, performance and latency of LSFG version 3 and AMD's FSR 3.1 frame generation techniques by analyzing some games running on my Rog Ally. LSFG is a universal frame generator, works on any GPU. It's a part of a paid application called Lossless Scaling that sells on Steam Store for around $7 US. FSR 3.1 on the other hand is completely free. It also works on any GPU, but it relies on game data like motion vectors. This is why it cannot be implemented on a driver level basis like AMD's AFMF2. It's up to the game developers to implement FSR frame generation in their games. To cut down the latency, I'll be using anti-lag 2. Currently only a few games support it officially, but using Optiscaler mod you can enable anti-lag 2 in games that support NVIDIA Reflex. Optiscaler achieves it using fake NV API. I'll kick things off with Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered. This game officially supports anti-lag 2. Before starting the game, I'll show you LSFG Settings. Launch Lossless Scaling application. Not using any of Lossless Scaling subscaling algorithms. I'll just use the in-game upscaler. Version 3 of LSFG is selected. Using its X2 mode, it will try to double the FPS. On Rog Ally, when using LSFG, if the game's base FPS exceeds 60, just cap it at 60. You can use RTSS to apply the 60 FPS cap. Can even use AMD's Radeon Chill via Adrenaline software. This way, LSFG will increase the FPS from 60 to 120. It will be composed of 60 real frames and 60 fake frames. The FPS will also stay within Ally's VRR range. You'll be getting a more stable experience and a lower latency compared to the FPS exceeding your display's max refresh rate value. Resolution scale maxed out. Clip cursor setting on. Sync mode default, max frame latency 1, draw FPS setting on, capture API DXGI. That's it. Settings, hotkey combo for enabling LSFG, control alt NS, start as administrator setting on. Just minimize the app. Adrenaline settings for Zero Dawn, FreeSync on, VSync off. I've set the UMF buffer size to auto. Using a 30 watts manual profile, all three power values set at 30 watts. My Ally is running on BIOS version 441. Install AMD's GPU driver Adrenaline Edition version 24.12.1. CPU boost disabled, resolution 720p. Connected my GuliKit KK3 Max gamepad to Ally via Bluetooth mode. For using LSFG, you need to set the display mode to borderless. Window mode full screen. This is basically borderless display mode. If you want to run the game in full screen mode, you need to select exclusive full screen mode. I'll stick to full screen, which is borderless display. 720p resolution, VSync off, anti-lag 2 on, upscale FSR 3.1 using its quality preset, frame generation disabled for the time being, FSR 3.1 using the low preset with motion blur set to nil. Using a custom afterburner overlay to show you the performance metrics, I'll enable anti-lag 2's latency monitor, press its hotkey combo, Alt Shift and L. Keep pressing the combo keys to highlight the different display options. I'll use this one, latency value shown in milliseconds. There's Aloy. Here FPS is around 37, latency value close to 60 milliseconds. I'm standing still, not doing anything. Move the camera in complete circles. 60 to 65 milliseconds of latency. FPS stays around 36. Animation looks a bit jarring. Here outside Ally's VRR range after all. 30 to 35. You can see GPU load is around 70%, so the game's performance seems to be limited by the single core CPU performance. I have no idea why this game is so demanding. I'll enable FSR frame generation on, apply. Back to the game, it's the same shot. Yeah, latency value is around 63 milliseconds now. 4 to 5 milliseconds increase in latency with FSR frame generation. Look at the added amount of smoothness. It's working properly. Minor increase in latency. Input delay is manageable. Game's HUD elements are not flickering. I'm not observing any ghosting around Aloy's character model. The crosshair is not flickering, no ghosting around it. Observe Aloy's character model around the left edge of the display. No ghosting around the character model. Impressive results produced by FSR frame generation in this game. Usually frame generation performance falls apart when the base FPS is on the lower side, 32, 35, like in this game. Very stable experience. Latency value never exceeded 70 milliseconds. Now I'll test LSFG. Disable frame generation. Disabled. Press LSFG's hotkey combo, Ctrl Alt and S. Back to the game. LSFG's FPS counter is getting blocked by anti-lag 2's latency monitor. LSFG's FPS value is basically twice that of the base FPS value. Here the base FPS is around 36. LSFG's FPS is around 72. It's as simple as that. Now just observe Aloy's character model. When I move the camera around, there's a ghosting effect around the character model. See? Definitely noticeable. This ghosting effect was not present when I was using FSR frame generation. Yeah, there is some ghosting around the crosshair as well. These artifacts become noticeable when you look around during fast visual motion. Game's HUD elements are not flickering though. Very impressed by LSFG's smoothing effect. That jarring animation is gone now, fixed. I'll be honest, LSFG's latency feels slightly higher than that of FSR frame generation. Latency value 63 milliseconds. Ghosting effect is visible even when I am running around. So in terms of image quality, FSR frame generation won. Performance wise, I would say it's a tie. And in terms of latency, I'll give the win to FSR frame generation. Now I'll test the next game. Now I'll run God of War Ragnarok. I'll enable anti-lag 2 using Optiscaler mod. Already showed you the process. We'll drop the video link in the description. I've set the UMF buffer size to 6 GB. From Adrenaline software, I have enabled FreeSync and disabled VSync in game settings. Display mode set to full screen. This is borderless full screen mode. VSync off. Reflex on. Optiscaler will replace it with anti-lag 2. Frame generation disabled for the time being. This is the game running at 720p resolution. Upscaler DLSS hits Optiscaler using the Upscaler's quality preset. Shadow set to low, rest of the settings set to medium. Film grain and motion blur disabled. Open Optiscaler menu. Upscaler selected. XeSS version 1.3.1. Frame generation off. There's Kratos. I'm in Svartalfheim. This area is very heavy on the CPU. FPS is close to 60. That's good to see. Yeah, here FPS dropped to around 43. Latency value is within a range of 35 to 50. It's very variable. 35 to 45. Yeah, latency value increases when I am looking around. It's due to the base FPS. It's so variable. Standing still. Here latency value is around 37 milliseconds. FPS 52. Now I'll enable LSFG. Press its hotkey combo. Yeah, it's working. Base FPS dropped to around 43. FPS with frame generation 86. Latency value increased from 37 to 42 milliseconds. Real world input delay. It's manageable. Can observe the added amount of smoothness. But I'm also observing some flickering around Kratos' head. His temple. See? This flickering issue was very aggressive in the older builds of LSFG. Got reduced with this new build. Here base FPS dropped to around 43-44. Now it's around 38. Latency value is around 48 milliseconds. Game's HUD elements are not flickering with LSFG. Now I'll test the same sequence using FSR Frame Generation. Go back to the starting point near our board right here. Enable frame generation via Optiscaler's menu. Back to the game. Yeah, FPS increased to around 84, 87. Can observe the added amount of smoothness. Kratos' head is not flickering. HUD elements are also not flickering. Latency value is close to 40 milliseconds, 42, 47. Latency feels slightly better with FSR frame generation than LSFG. Not a big difference though. Go to this point. FPS is close to 72, so the base FPS should be around 36. Again, the performance is roughly the same, but in terms of image quality, I'll give the win to FSR frame generation. Also, slightly better latency. Now I'll be testing the next game. Now I'll be running Hitman 3, Epic Games version. In this game I'll be enabling anti-lag 2 via Optiscaler mod. Again, already showed you the process. Enter in settings for the game. Same settings, FreeSync on, VSync off. In-game settings, display mode, full screen, which is basically borderless. Full HD resolution, VSync off, reflex on. Upscaler DLSS, Optiscaler is working using the Upscaler's quality preset. Everything set to high. 16 times isotropic filtering. Motion blur off. Simulation quality best. Optiscaler menu, Upscaler XCSS version 1.3.1. Frame generation off. There's Agent 47. Beautiful lighting. We are in a hotel. Here base FPS is around 46. Latency value is close to 50 milliseconds. Now I'll enable LSFG. FPS stays within the range of 45 to 48. Press its hotkey combo. Yeah, it's working. Base FPS dropped to around 39. FPS with frame generation on 77. Latency value increased from 50 to 55 milliseconds. Look at the smoothing effect. Amazing. HUD elements are not flickering, but I am observing some flickering around Agent 47's bald head. It's aggressive. Latency is manageable. Very impressed by LSFG smoothing effect. 75 to 80 FPS with frame generation, but look at that head flickering going on. Okay, now I'll test FSR frame generation. Need to close afterburner overlay, otherwise Optiscaler hotfix won't work properly. Disable LSFG. Enable frame generation, hotfix setting enabled as well. Back to the game. FPS with frame generation is close to 75. Latency value increased to around 53 milliseconds. FSR's latency is slightly lower than that of LSFG. I can feel it. Not observing any flickering around Agent 47's bald head. So in terms of image quality, I'll give the win to FSR frame generation. Even the HUD elements are not flickering. But I'll be honest, LSFG smoothing effect felt slightly better than that of FSR frame generation smoothing effect in this game. It's still doing a good job. Base FPS was like around 45. Now it's around 75. I'll test the next game. Alan Wake 2 Epic Games version. In this game I'll be enabling anti-lag 2 using DLSS enabler mode. From Adrenaline settings I have enabled FreeSync and disabled VSync. In-game settings display mode borderless. Resolution 720p. DLSS upscaler enable. Optiscaler. Using the upscaler's quality preset. Frame generation disabled for the time being. VSync, motion blur, film grain and lens distortion settings disabled. Low to medium settings. Ray tracing off. There's Alan. I'm in a safe zone. Yeah, here FPS is within a range of 33 to 40. Latency value is within a range of 65 to 75. Gameplay is a bit choppy. See the frame pacing graph, so erratic. And just enable LSFG. Back to the game. Latency value increased to around 76 milliseconds. FPS with frame generation close to 72. Value is twice that of the base FPS, 36-37. Yeah, I can observe the added amount of smoothness. See, not observing any artifacts around Alan's character model. His head is not flickering. LSFG works very nicely in Alan Wake 2. Even the crosshair is not flickering. See, HUD elements not flickering. Frame pacing graph is not correct. Not observing any frame pacing issues. Okay, now I'll test FSR frame generation. Disabled LSFG, FSR frame generation on. Reload the same point. Back to the game. Look at that frame pacing graph. It's a flat line. Can observe the added amount of smoothness. This is amazing. Even though the latency value shown here is higher than the value shown in the case of LSFG, FSR frame generation's latency feels slightly better than that of LSFG. Not a big difference again. HUD elements are not flickering. I am observing some ghosting around the left edge of the display. This can happen in the case of FSR frame generation mode. We didn't see this ghosting effect around the left edge when I enable FSR frame generation in Horizon official implementation. Dark place. Yeah, when I look around, there is some ghosting around Alan's character model. This effect will become more noticeable when the base FPS is on the lower side. In the case of Rog Ally, which is within a range of 30 to 35. But LSFG did not produce this graphical artifact. Both of these techniques produce their own graphical artifacts. In this game, I'll give the win to LSFG. In terms of image quality, performance wise, they are roughly the same. Now I'll test the next game. Last but not least, we have Ghost of Tsushima. It officially supports anti-lag 2. Adrenaline settings, VSync on, VSync off. The text is so small. Window mode, full screen, which is borderless full screen mode. 720p resolution, VSync off. FSR 3 upscaler selected using its quality preset. Frame generation disabled for the time being. Anti-lag 2 on. Using the medium preset. Motion blur strength set to nil. That's it. There's gents. This area is very heavy on the CPU. You can see GPU load is around 80%. FPS value is within a range of 42 to 45. Animation looks a bit jarring. Outside allies VRR range. Latency value is within a range of 50 to 57 milliseconds. 53 milliseconds when standing still. I'll just enable LSFG now. Base FPS dropped to around 42. Latency value increased to around 60 milliseconds. Move the camera around. Can observe the added amount of smoothness, but Jin's head is flickering. This issue is back again. Even his bow is flickering, see? Hard elements are not flickering though. Yeah, the crosshair is also flickering. These graphical artifacts are more noticeable on a bigger display. I'm just running around. FPS with frame generation stays close to 80. Smoothing effect is very impressive. That jarring animation is completely gone. Animation looks smooth now. Now I'll test FSR frame generation. On. Load the same sequence, FPS increased to around 80, latency value increased to around 60 milliseconds. Roughly the same latency when using LSFG and FSR frame generation in this game. Okay, I'm observing some flickering around Jin's head during fast visual motion, but I'll be honest, this flickering effect was more aggressive in the case of LSFG. There is some minor ghosting around Jin's bow, very difficult to observe this ghosting issue on a small display. So in terms of image quality, I'll give the win to FSR frame generation. Hard elements are not flickering. Just run around. FPS with frame generation. Performance wise, it's a tie between LSFG and FSR frame generation. Time to conclude the video. First I'll cover the performance. Both of these frame generation techniques did an amazing job. Even when the base FPS was on the lower side, within an FPS range of 30 to 40, they were able to transform a choppy looking animation into a smooth looking animation. In some games I preferred the smoothing effect of FSR frame generation, while in others I preferred LSFG. It's as simple as that. In terms of latency, I would say that FSR frame generation is slightly better than LSFG, but the difference is nothing huge. In this department, LSFG has improved a lot compared to its older builds. In Ghost of Tsushima and Alan Wake 2, I experienced roughly the same latency when using LSFG and FSR frame generation. Even when the base FPS is on the lower side, like 30 to 35, you can use either of these techniques. The input delay produced will be manageable if you are using a gamepad. If you are using a mouse, I would recommend targeting a base FPS of 50 to 60. The concept is very simple. Higher the base FPS, lower the latency. It's as simple as that. In terms of image quality, FSR frame generation is better, but it's not perfect. It does produce some graphical artifacts, but around the character model, FSR frame generation produces less graphical artifacts than LSFG. The head flickering issue is still present in the case of LSFG version 3, but now it's not as aggressive as what we have seen in the case of older versions of LSFG. So if a game supports FSR frame generation, just use it instead of LSFG. If a game supports DLSS frame generation but has no support for FSR frame generation, you can use an FSR frame generation mod to replace DLSS frame generation with FSR frame generation. For the remaining games, you can use LSFG. I prefer using techniques like reflex and anti-lag to cut down the latency. Very effective solutions. So that's it with the video, guys. I hope you found it useful. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.